Welcome to the Singer's Toolkit, the podcast where host Antonio De Lillis shares his expertise and knowledge on all things singing. Join us as we explore the world of singing, from the science behind the voice to the artistry of performance. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, this podcast is the perfect resource for improving your vocal skills and taking your singing to the next level.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You sent in this paper and it's super interesting. It really gets into like the nitty-gritty of singing pedagogy.
Yeah.
Specifically, this whole debate about using imagery versus, science when it comes to teaching singing.
Yes.
And the thing is, this isn't new. This has been going on for like centuries.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's what I really want to unpack. Like, what's the deal with all this imagery?
Yeah.
And could some of those instructions that teachers give actually be kind of counterproductive,
Right. It's a good question. And it really comes down to, I think, the challenge of visualizing what's happening inside the larynx.
The voice box.
Yeah, the voice box, exactly.
Yeah.
You can't see it.
Right.
For centuries, teachers couldn't see what was happening either.
Right.
So they had to come up with ways to explain these things that you can't see and you can't feel directly.
It's like trying to teach somebody to bake a cake, but they can't see the ingredients or the oven.
Exactly. It's a perfect analogy. Yeah. So that's where the imagery comes in. So you might hear a teacher say something like, imagine your breath is like a stream of water flowing over a smooth rock.
I've heard that.
Yeah, and that helps the student sort of visualize this concept of smooth airflow.
Right. And I actually thought it was interesting. The paper quotes Richard Miller, who's like this, leading figure in vocal pedagogy.
Absolutely.
And he says that accomplished singers a lot of times are relying more on recall and past experience than actually, what they're doing in the moment.
Right.
Which is really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It suggests that even without a scientific understanding, singers have developed these kind of internal maps of how their voice works.
Right, right.
But he also pointed out a potential problem with that.
Okay.
He cautioned that when artists become teachers, they often rely on imagery.
Okay.
Drawn from their own unique experience.
Right.
And what works for one singer might not work for another.
Yeah.
Especially if they're facing different technical challenges.
So it's almost like this telephone game effect where it gets
Yes.
passed down and loses its precision.
Exactly. And that's where the potential for harm comes in.
Right.
Because if you're basing your technique on an image that doesn't accurately reflect the physical reality of your vocal mechanism, you could end up straining your voice.
This is making me think about all those like vocal myths that we've all heard,
Yes.
singing from your diaphragm or, placing your sound in your forehead.
Right.
The paper really digs into that stuff.
Yeah. And that's where science has played such a crucial role. In recent decades, over the last 50 years, voice science has really revolutionized our understanding of how the voice works.
Okay.
And, we've moved away from these kind of vague terms like chest voice and head voice
Yeah.
to more precise language that reflects the specific muscles and cartilages involved in producing sound.
So instead of chest voice and head voice, we're now talking about...
We're talking about things like thyroid quality and cricothyroid quality.
Those are intimidating.
They are a little intimidating, but they refer to the different ways your vocal folds vibrate to produce different sounds.
Got it.
So if you think about your vocal folds, those two little muscles in your larynx as having two main ways to vibrate.
Okay.
So the thyroid muscles, and that's where that term comes from, thyroid quality, they produce a thicker, heavier sound,
Okay.
often associated with lower notes.
Okay.
And then the cricothyroid muscles, they create a thinner, lighter sound. And those are often associated with higher notes.
So it's not really about where the sound resonates, but rather how your vocal folds are actually
Exactly.
vibrating.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that whole myth about vocal cords working like strings on a violin,
Right.
busted thanks to science.
Totally busted.
We now know that vocal folds are much more complex than that.
It's amazing to think that for centuries, singers and teachers had to just rely on their subjective experiences and imagination to guide their technique. It's like navigating a dark room.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then voice science came along and flipped on the light switch.
Yeah.
And so now we actually have tools to see and measure what's happening,
Right. Yeah.
giving us a more accurate map of how things work.
Right.
But even with all these advancements, we still haven't cracked every mystery.
Right.
The paper mentioned an ongoing debate about the role of the diaphragm in breath support.
Yes, and they brought up that study by Sundberg back in 1987.
Right.
that concluded, abdominal muscles are involved in regulating breath pressure.
Yeah.
And that actually challenged an earlier theory by Watson and Hickson.
Right. It just highlights that our understanding of the voice is constantly evolving.
Right.
But one thing is clear. The voice is an incredibly complex instrument.
Totally.
And there's still so much to learn and discover.
This is already making me rethink some of the things I was taught about singing.
Yeah.
But if science has debunked so many vocal myths, where does that leave imagery? Does it still have a place in singing pedagogy?
That's a great question. And it's one we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
So we've talked about how science is like shedding light on these vocal myths, but
Yeah.
are there any specific singing instructions that in light of, modern research might be doing more harm than good?
There are a few, and they're surprisingly common.
Okay.
One that often comes up is chest resonance.
Okay.
It might feel powerful to imagine the sound resonating in your chest,
Right.
but scientifically speaking, it's a misconception.
But I've heard teachers talk about like finding that gold mine in your chest,
Okay.
even encouraging students to like beat their chest.
Yes.
To feel the resonance.
Yes, and while it might feel like there's a lot of vibration in the chest,
Right.
the science tells a different story.
Okay.
Authors like Titzi and McKinney,
Mm-hmm.
who are leading researchers in voice science, they explain that the sensation you feel
Okay.
is more about the transfer of energy from the vocal folds to the surrounding bones and tissues.
So the chest is more like a speaker cabinet than the actual
The exact
scripts of the sound.
Yeah, it's like feeling the rumble of a powerful subwoofer.
Got it. Okay, so then what about like the instruction to feel your diaphragm?
That's another one that can lead to a lot of confusion because the diaphragm is a muscle,
Right.
but it lacks proprioceptive nerve endings,
Okay.
meaning we can't directly feel it move. So when singers think they're feeling their diaphragm, they're actually sensing other things, like pressure changes in the abdominal cavity,
Right.
or the movement of surrounding muscles.
It's like trying to track a shadow. You see the effect,
Exactly.
but not the actual thing itself.
Yes.
So if we can't actually feel it,
Right.
how can we effectively control our breath support?
Instead of trying to isolate the diaphragm, it's more helpful to think about coordinating the entire breathing mechanism.
Okay.
So the diaphragm abdominal muscles, intercostal muscles, they all work together to create this steady stream of air
Right.
that powers the voice.
So it's more about that overall sense of expansion
Yeah.
rather than just focusing on any one muscle.
Precisely. Another instruction that often gets misconstrued is raise the palate.
Oh, yeah.
You might hear teachers saying, sniff as if you're smelling a rose.
Right.
But sniffing actually does the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, because sniffing closes off the nasal passage,
Okay.
which pulls the soft palate downward.
Hmm.
So if you want to create more space in the vocal tract, a gentle yawn
Okay.
is actually a more effective way to lift the soft palate.
Interesting. I'm realizing how many of these instructions are based on imagery that isn't quite
Right.
accurate.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the science can be so empowering, because it allows singers to move beyond these potentially misleading cues
Okay.
and develop a more accurate understanding of their vocal mechanism.
So for example, instead of like placing your sound in specific locations,
Right.
science says focus on shaping your vocal tract.
Exactly. By adjusting the position of your tongue, your jaw, your lips,
Right.
you can create different resonant qualities.
So we have more control over the resonance than I even realized.
Absolutely.
It's not about like directing the sound to specific points.
Right.
It's about shaping the space
Exactly.
that the sound travels through.
You got it.
That's really cool. Okay, so then what about open your throat? Because I've heard that a lot.
Yeah, that's another tricky one because widening the throat can actually create tension and strain.
So what's the alternative? How do you create that sense of openness?
Right. The key is to think about releasing tension
Okay.
rather than forcing openness. So you can visualize the sense of space and relaxation in the back of the throat, similar to the feeling you have when you yawn.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
This is really fascinating. It's making me realize how much of what we've been taught about singing
Yeah.
is based on interpretation rather than
Right.
fact.
And that's why a balanced approach is so crucial.
Oh, okay.
While science offers a more objective understanding of how the voice works, we can't dismiss the power of imagery. Well-chosen imagery can help singers connect to those internal sensations and make these abstract concepts more tangible.
Like the difference between reading a map and actually like exploring a landscape.
That's a great analogy.
Right. The map gives you the lay of the land.
Yeah.
But it's the experience of being in the landscape that really brings it to life.
Exactly.
So it seems like the ideal approach is to use science to inform our imagery.
Yes.
So that the metaphors we're using are actually grounded in, how the voice functions.
Absolutely. And the beauty of this approach is that it empowers singers to become active participants in their vocal development.
Right. Yeah.
They're not just blindly following instructions. They're developing a deeper awareness of how their own unique instrument works.
So it's like a partnership between the science and the imagery.
Exactly.
Where science provides the framework and imagery helps us to inhabit and experience that framework. It's like the science provides the blueprint for a house.
I like that.
And the imagery helps us to visualize what it would be like to live in that house.
Yes. And it reminds us that the ultimate goal of singing is not just to produce a beautiful sound, but to express ourselves authentically and connect with others through the power of music.
Absolutely. And speaking of connecting, let's circle back to that thought-provoking quote from the paper.
Okay.
What is accepted to be true in pedagogy today may become untrue tomorrow.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it highlights the fact that our understanding of the voice is always evolving.
Right.
What might have been considered best practice a few decades ago could be challenged by new research and new discoveries.
So it's a reminder to stay curious, to keep learning, and to be open to new perspectives.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that while the science is constantly evolving, the art of singing remains a timeless and profoundly human endeavor.
Yeah, that idea of staying curious and, questioning everything really resonates with me. Because it makes you realize that there's always more to learn and discover when it comes to the voice.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this field so exciting.
Right.
It's a constant journey of exploration and discovery.
So where does this leave, our listener in their own vocal journey if what's considered true can change?
Sure.
How should they approach learning and evaluating singing advice?
That's a great question. And it highlights the need for critical thinking and discernment. Don't be afraid to question what you've been taught, to explore different approaches, and to seek out evidence-based information.
So it's about being an active participant in your own vocal development.
Exactly.
Not just accepting everything at face value, but really digging deeper to understand why.
And remember, your voice is unique.
Right.
What works for one singer might not work for another.
Right.
It's about finding what resonates with you, both literally and figuratively.
This whole conversation reminds me of a quote from the paper by Scott McCoy. He said, "Science helps build the instrument, but artistry is needed to play it."
Oh, that's beautiful.
I love that.
It really captures the essence of singing.
It reminds us that while, understanding the mechanics is important, it's ultimately about using our voice to express ourselves, to connect with others, and to create something beautiful.
Absolutely.
So science provides the foundation, the structure, but it's the artistry that really brings it to life. It's knowing the notes on the piano is essential.
Right.
But it's the musician who creates the music.
Exactly. And just like any art form, there's always room for growth experimentation.
Right.
And personal expression in singing.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From the historical use of imagery to the, clarifying role of science and the importance of finding that balance.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating exploration.
I think so.
And I hope our deep dive has inspired you to continue exploring the wonders of your own voice.
Keep singing, keep learning, and keep those vocal cords humming. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on our podcast. We hope you found our content insightful and thought-provoking. Before we go, we'd like to thank all our listeners for their invaluable support. If you enjoyed our podcast and want to contribute to its growth, please consider making a donation via PayPal to delillisantonio@gmail.com. That's D for Delta, E for Echo, L for Lima, I for India, L for Lima, L for Lima, I for India, S for Sierra, A for Alpha, N for November, T for Tango, O for Oscar, N for November, I for India, O for Oscar @gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening.